July 2, 1943. Castelvetrano Airfield, Sicily. The afternoon sun burns white against the Mediterranean sky. The Focke-Wulf 190 pilot never notices the P-40 Warhawk diving from 20,000 feet until machine gun fire tears through his fuselage. The German aircraft spirals earthward, trailing black smoke against the brilliant blue. First Lieutenant Charles B. Hall, 22 years old from Brazil, Indiana, pulls out of his dive and waggles his wings. Below him, the enemy fighter cartwheels into the Sicilian countryside. The swastika painted on Hall's P-40 that afternoon becomes the first of 112 enemy aircraft that will fall to pilots the Germans will reportedly call Schwarzvogelmenschen. The Black Birdman. In Nazi Germany, racial doctrine classifies black people as Untermenschen. Subhuman. Incapable of mastering complex machinery. Incapable of demonstrating courage in combat. The Nuremberg laws forbid marriages between Germans and people of African descent. Propaganda films show Africans as primitive, childlike, intellectually inferior. Yet here, above Sicily's burning landscape, that ideology is about to collide catastrophically with reality. 992 trained pilots from Tuskegee, Alabama will systematically demolish both German aircraft and German assumptions about racial superiority. What the Luftwaffe pilots don't know as they climb to intercept American bombers is that they're about to face some of the most rigorously trained, highly motivated fighter pilots in the entire United States Army Air Forces. Men who have overcome obstacles their white counterparts never faced. Men who have trained harder and longer than standard pilots. Men who carry into battle not just the weight of national duty, but the burden of proving an entire race's capability. The mathematics of aerial combat will soon be written in the skies over Europe. 15,000 combat sorties. 1,578 missions. 112 aerial victories. And a bomber escort loss rate significantly lower than white fighter groups. Statistics that will force even the most fanatical Nazi ideologues to confront the bankruptcy of their racial theories. But this story doesn't begin in the skies over Sicily. It begins in the grinding machinery of American segregation, where the dream of flight was considered as impossible as the dream of equality itself. January 1925. The United States Army War College publishes a study titled Employment of Negro Manpower in War. Its conclusions are stark and official. Compared to the white man, he is admittedly of inferior mentality. He is inherently weak in character. The cranial cavity of the Negro is smaller than the white, and the Negro brain weighs on average 3 ounces less. This isn't fringe racism. This is the institutional position of America's military establishment. The report concludes that black soldiers lack the intelligence for technical roles and the courage for combat leadership. Flying an aircraft requires split-second decision-making, spatial reasoning, technical knowledge. According to military science in 1925, these abilities are biologically impossible for black men. Yet even as these words are being printed, a black American named Eugene Bullard is already proving them wrong. He flew for France in World War I because America wouldn't let him serve. He shot down 2 German aircraft. When he tried to join the American Air Service, he was rejected. Not for lack of skill. For the color of his skin. Throughout the 1920s and 1930s, black Americans who dream of aviation face a wall of institutional rejection. Commercial airlines won't hire them. Flight schools won't train them. The Army Air Corps states explicitly that Negroes are not being trained as pilots because they lack the necessary aptitude. Meanwhile, white America falls in love with flight. Charles Lindbergh crosses the Atlantic and becomes a national hero. Amelia Earhart captures the public imagination. Aviation represents freedom, modernity, the future. A future that has no place for black Americans. But resistance is growing. In Chicago, a group of black aviation enthusiasts forms the Challenger Air Pilots Association. In Los Angeles, brothers Neil and Herbert Allen open a flight school specifically for black students. In Harlem, black newspapers begin demanding that the military's aviation ban be lifted. The Pittsburgh Courier launches a campaign. Why can't a Negro fly? The answer, unspoken but clear, is because letting them fly would acknowledge their equality. If a black man can master the same technology, demonstrate the same courage, achieve the same results as a white man, then the entire edifice of segregation begins to crumble. September 1939. Germany invades Poland. War spreads across Europe. America watches, neutral but increasingly nervous. The Army Air Corps begins to expand. Applications pour in from black Americans eager to serve. All are rejected. The policy is clear. This is a white man's war, at least in the air. But political pressure is mounting. The NAACP files lawsuits. Black newspapers intensify their campaigns. More importantly, war production needs black workers. To get black support for defense industries, the Roosevelt administration needs to make concessions. In June 1940, Congress passes the Civilian Pilot Training Act. Buried in the legislation is an amendment inserted by Representative Everett Dirksen. It requires the Civilian Aeronautics Authority to include one or more schools designated for the training of any Negro air pilot. It's a grudging concession wrapped in segregation. But it's a beginning. Eleanor Roosevelt visits Tuskegee Institute in Alabama. She meets Charles Anderson, chief flight instructor. Against Secret Service protests, she flies with him. The photograph of the First Lady with a black pilot appears in newspapers nationwide. It's a carefully orchestrated political message, but the message is powerful. If Eleanor Roosevelt trusts her life to a black pilot, perhaps the military should reconsider its policies. November 1940. Franklin Roosevelt runs for an unprecedented third term. He needs black votes in key northern cities. On January 16, 1941, Secretary of War Henry Stimson announces the formation of the 99th Pursuit Squadron. An all-black flying unit. The announcement comes with a caveat that reveals the military's expectations. This will be an experiment to test whether Negroes can be trained as combat pilots. Experiment. As if centuries of evidence from every field of human endeavor aren't enough. As if the very act of breathing, thinking, striving needs to be scientifically verified before black men can be permitted to serve their country. Tuskegee Institute in Alabama becomes the training site. Not coincidentally, Tuskegee is in the Deep South, where segregation is absolute. The facility can be completely isolated from white cadets. The experiment can be controlled, observed, measured. March 1942. The first class begins training. 13 men. They've been selected from thousands of applicants. They're college graduates, men with civilian pilot licenses, men who've already proven their capability. Yet they must prove it again, under conditions deliberately designed to break them. The washout rate at Tuskegee is 60%, compared to 40% for white cadets. Some of this is because only the most qualified black applicants are even permitted to try. Some of it is because the training is deliberately more rigorous. The unspoken logic is clear. A mediocre white pilot can fail and it reflects only on him. A mediocre black pilot becomes evidence that the entire race is unfit for flight. Captain Benjamin O. Davis Jr. emerges as the program's first graduate and its natural leader. The son of America's first black general, Davis endured 4 years at West Point where no white cadet would speak to him outside of official duties. 4 years of silence, isolation, systematic exclusion. He graduated anyway, 35th in his class. Now he leads men who carry not just their own hopes, but the aspirations of 13 million black Americans. They train on worn-out aircraft. Hand-me-down PT-17 Stearmans and At-6 Texans, planes with thousands of hours already on their airframes. They fly more hours than white cadets. 300 compared to 200. They practice formation flying obsessively, knowing that in combat, discipline will be their edge. They know they cannot afford mistakes. They know the nation is watching, waiting for them to fail. And they know that failure will be used as justification for continued exclusion. The pressure is immense. It breaks some men. Others grow harder under it, more determined. Frederick Gregory, who will later command the 99th Fighter Squadron, remembers the atmosphere. We knew we weren't just training to be pilots. We were fighting a war before we ever saw combat. Every landing had to be perfect. Every maneuver flawless. Because we knew that somewhere, someone was recording our mistakes and using them to prove we didn't belong. By April 1943, the 99th Fighter Squadron is ready for deployment. 147 officers and enlisted men. They board the USS Mariposa in New York Harbor bound for North Africa. It's a segregated ship. White troops travel in cabins. The Tuskegee Airmen are quartered in a hold, in spaces normally reserved for cargo. They don't complain. They've learned that complaining changes nothing. What matters now is proving what they can do in combat. As the Mariposa steams toward Casablanca, the men of the 99th Fighter Squadron understand they're about to face two enemies. The Germans, who believe they're racially superior. And their own army, which believes the same thing. The question that will be answered in the skies over the Mediterranean is simple and terrible. When given the same training, the same aircraft, the same opportunity, can black men fight as well as white men? The men of the 99th already know the answer. Now they have to prove it. Not with words. With blood and victory. Tuskegee, Alabama. Summer 1941. The heat rises in visible waves from the tarmac at Moton Field. The temperature inside the cockpit of a PT-17 Stearman reaches 115 degrees. Lieutenant Mac Ross wipes sweat from his goggles and checks his instruments. Below him, the Alabama countryside stretches flat and green. From the control tower, Lieutenant Harold Washington, one of the first black flight instructors, watches another cadet struggle with crosswind landings. He makes notes on a clipboard. Every mistake is documented. Every success must be verified. This isn't just flight training. It's building a legal case. Evidence that will be used either to expand or eliminate black participation in military aviation. The stakes are understood by everyone at Tuskegee. Charles Debo, who will later shoot down 3 German fighters in a single mission, remembers his first day at the facility. We walked past buildings where they kept records of everything. Our reaction times. Our test scores. Our mechanical aptitude. It felt less like joining the military and more like being laboratory specimens. And in a way, that's exactly what we were. The Tuskegee Army Airfield is a facility within a facility. A segregated world where black cadets train separately from white America. The base has its own barracks, its own mess halls, its own maintenance crews. Black personnel cannot use facilities designated for whites. This includes the base hospital, where injured black airmen are treated in separate wards. But something unexpected happens at Tuskegee. The very isolation that was meant to limit the program instead creates intense cohesion. These men know they're fighting for something larger than personal achievement. Every successful flight is a victory against prejudice. Every graduation is a crack in the wall of segregation. Colonel Frederick Vaughn Kimball, the base commander, is a white Southerner who initially expresses skepticism about the program. But he's also a professional officer who recognizes competence when he sees it. After 6 months, he writes to Army Air Forces headquarters, the Negro pilots in training at Tuskegee are performing at levels equal to or exceeding white cadets in similar programs. Their discipline is exceptional. Their motivation is the highest I have observed in my career. This assessment doesn't make national news. The War Department files it quietly. Positive reports about black military performance don't align with institutional assumptions. Meanwhile, at Tuskegee, the training intensifies. The cadets learn aerobatics, instrument flying, formation tactics, gunnery. They study aircraft recognition, navigation, radio procedures, combat tactics. The curriculum is identical to white flight schools. But the psychological pressure is incomparable. Benjamin O. Davis Jr., now a captain commanding the 99th Fighter Squadron, institutes additional training beyond the standard curriculum. He requires his pilots to study enemy tactics obsessively. They analyze gun camera footage from European combat. They memorize German formation patterns, attack angles, evasion techniques. Davis knows his men need to be more than equal. They need to be superior. Not because they're naturally superior, but because they'll be fighting 2 wars. One against the enemy. One against their own military establishment. Lieutenant Lee Archer, who will become one of the highest-scoring black aces, describes the training philosophy. Colonel Davis told us straight. You will be better pilots than your white counterparts, or you will fail. And your failure will be used to justify continuing discrimination. It wasn't fair. But fairness wasn't going to win us the right to fight. The ground crews at Tuskegee faced their own challenges. Aircraft mechanics, armorers, crew chiefs, all trained in segregated facilities. They maintain the squadron's aging aircraft with limited parts and frequent improvisation. When white units receive new P-40 Warhawks, Tuskegee inherits their worn-out aircraft. The ground crews make them flyable anyway. Master Sergeant Buford Johnson, a crew chief from Mississippi, remembers working 18-hour days to keep planes in the air. We'd scavenge parts from crashed aircraft. We'd manufacture components in our own shops. White mechanics got replacement parts delivered by truck. We got nothing but determination. And somehow, that was enough. By early 1943, the 99th Fighter Squadron is operationally ready. 147 officers and men. 12 combat-ready P-40 Warhawk fighters. They've trained longer and harder than any comparable white unit. Their gunnery scores are excellent. Their formation flying is textbook perfect. Now comes the hardest test. Combat. April 2, 1943. The 99th boards the USS Mariposa in New York Harbor. Destination, Casablanca, then Tunisia. The reality of segregation follows them across the Atlantic. The ship's commanding officer assigns them to quarters in the cargo holds. White troops occupy the passenger cabins. Some white soldiers express surprise that black men are going to combat. One asks Lieutenant Span Watson if the 99th will be digging latrines in North Africa. Watson replies quietly, "We're fighter pilots." The white soldier laughs. "Sure you are." Watson doesn't argue. He's learned that arguing is pointless. He'll let his guns do the talking. April 24, 1943. Farjuna Airfield, Tunisia. The 99th Fighter Squadron arrives in a combat zone. They're attached to the 33rd Fighter Group under Colonel William Momyer. Momyer is a competent officer and an unabashed racist. He makes his feelings clear in the first briefing. "I didn't ask for you. I don't want you. But since you're here, you'll follow orders and stay out of the way of real pilots." The 99th is assigned coastal patrol missions. Flying over the Mediterranean, watching for enemy shipping. It's the safest, least important duty in the theater. Momyer wants them to fail quietly, away from the real fighting. But Davis understands the game being played. He tells his pilots, "We'll fly every mission perfectly. We'll volunteer for the dangerous work. We'll prove ourselves not through words, but through performance." May 31, 1943. The waiting ends. The 99th receives orders for their first combat mission. An attack on the Italian-held island of Pantelleria. As they climb toward their targets in worn P-40s, the enemy appears. German fighters, Messerschmitt Bf-109s, diving from the sun. For a moment, the world narrows to instinct and training. The Tuskegee pilots hold formation, protecting their bombers. No aircraft are lost on either side. But the Germans have learned their first lesson. These pilots won't break under pressure. Back at Farjuna, Colonel Momyer reviews the mission reports. He notes that the 99th didn't score any kills. He makes a note in his file. Further evidence, he believes, of their limitations. But Charles Hall sees something else. He saw how the German pilots attacked, where they came from, how they maneuvered. He studies his gun camera film. He rehearses the engagement in his mind. Next time, he tells himself. Next time I'll be ready. July 2, 1943. The mission to Castelvetrano. Hall gets his chance. And when his burst of 50 caliber fire sends a Focke-Wulf 190 spinning into the Sicilian countryside, everything changes. The entire base erupts when Hall lands. The ground crew who endured months of insults from white personnel finally have their answer to every slight. Black newspapers across America run the story. First aerial victory by Negro pilot. In Germany, propaganda officials struggle with the news. How to explain a black pilot shooting down an Aryan airman? They can't. So they bury the story and hope it's an anomaly. But it isn't an anomaly. It's the beginning. Hall's victory is the first of many. And each German fighter that falls to Tuskegee guns becomes another nail in the coffin of racial pseudoscience. July 1943. The Allied invasion of Sicily begins. Operation Husky. 160,000 men assault beaches defended by German and Italian forces. The 99th Fighter Squadron flies constant missions, supporting ground troops, strafing enemy positions, protecting bombers. They're no longer flying coastal patrols. They're in the war's hottest combat zone. The P-40 Warhawk, their primary aircraft, is already obsolete by 1943 standards. German Bf-109s and Fw-190s outperform it in nearly every metric. Faster, more maneuverable, better armed. The only advantages the P-40 possesses are rugged construction and the skill of its pilots. The Tuskegee Airmen make those advantages count. July 9, 1943. Lieutenant Willie Ashley shoots down an Italian fighter over the beaches of Gela. July 11, Lieutenant Charles Dryden damages 2 enemy aircraft. The mission reports pile up. The 99th is holding its own in one of the war's most intense combat theaters. But Colonel Momyer sees something else in the statistics. The 99th's kill rate is lower than white squadrons. They're not producing aces. In September 1943, Momyer writes a confidential report to Army Air Forces headquarters. He recommends that the 99th be removed from combat duty and relegated to coastal patrol. His reasoning is clear. The Negro pilot has not shown the aggressiveness necessary for a first-rate fighter pilot. Their performance has been unsatisfactory. The report goes to General Hap Arnold, commanding general of the Army Air Forces. It arrives at a crucial moment. Plans are being developed to form additional black fighter squadrons. The 100th, 301st, and 302nd are in training. If Mommyer's assessment is accurate, the entire program should be terminated. The institutional belief that black men cannot be combat pilots will be confirmed. But something unexpected happens. Bomber crews who've flown with 99th Escort begin writing their own reports. Letters reach congressmen. Stories appear in northern newspapers. The bomber crews tell a different story. They describe Tuskegee fighters that stay with them, protect them, don't abandon them for easy kills like some white squadrons do. Lieutenant Colonel William Coleman, a bomber pilot, writes, "I've flown missions with various fighter escorts. The Negro pilots of the 99th stick closer to the bombers than anyone else. I don't care what color they are. I want them protecting me." Benjamin Davis, now promoted to colonel, requests a hearing to answer Mommyer's charges. In September 1943, he testifies before the Army Air Forces Board. The room is filled with white generals and colonels. Davis is the only black officer present. He presents his case methodically. He notes that the 99th has flown missions in the war's most dangerous airspace. He points out that kill rates depend on opportunity, not just ability. He documents the unit's bomber protection record. He remains calm, professional, unemotional. But inside, he's fighting for the survival of black military aviation. The board deliberates for 2 weeks. During that time, the 99th continues flying combat missions over Italy. Lieutenant Clarence Jameson shoots down a German fighter. Lieutenant Samuel Bruce damages 2 enemy aircraft. The victories continue accumulating, 1 mission at a time. October 1943. The board issues its decision. The 99th Fighter Squadron will remain in combat. Their performance has been deemed satisfactory. It's not a ringing endorsement. But it's enough. The program will continue. In December 1943, the 332nd Fighter Group is formed in Italy. It will consist of the 99th, 100th, 301st, and 302nd Fighter Squadrons. All black units. Colonel Benjamin Davis takes command. For the first time in American military history, a black officer will command a fighter group in combat. January 1944. The 332nd arrives at Ramitelli Airfield on Italy's Adriatic coast. The base is primitive compared to other American facilities. The runways are made of pierced steel planking. The living quarters are tents. The winter mud is ankle-deep. Supply convoys arrive last at Ramitelli. The 332nd is always at the end of the logistics chain. When new aircraft are distributed, the 332nd receives the oldest models. When spare parts are allocated, other units get priority. This is not official policy. It's the informal hierarchy of segregation, translated into military logistics. Master Sergeant Elmer Jones, a crew chief from Alabama, remembers those months. We'd go weeks without proper parts. We'd cannibalize crashed aircraft. We'd manufacture gaskets from leather. Somehow, we kept the birds flying. Because we knew that if our planes stayed grounded, it would be used as proof we couldn't handle the mission. But something is changing. The 332nd isn't just fighting for acceptance anymore. They're becoming an elite unit. Their training at Tuskegee, their determination to excel, their obsessive attention to detail, all of it is producing results. The unit's aircraft availability rate, the percentage of planes ready for combat, equals or exceeds white squadrons despite inferior resources. February 1944. The 332nd transitions to P-47 Thunderbolts. The massive fighters, called jugs by pilots, are a significant upgrade from the worn-out P-40s. But the real transformation comes in June 1944 when the unit receives P-51 Mustangs. The North American P-51D is the finest fighter aircraft of the war. With its Packard-built Merlin engine, it can reach 437 miles per hour. Its 650 caliber machine guns can destroy any aircraft. Most importantly, its range, over 1,600 miles with drop tanks, allows it to escort bombers anywhere in the Reich. General Nathan Twining, commanding the 15th Air Force, issues an order that will make the 332nd famous. Each fighter group will paint their aircraft with distinctive markings for instant identification. The 332nd is assigned red. Not just red noses or red bands. Entire tail sections. Red propeller spinners. Red nose bands. The P-51 Mustangs become unmistakable in the sky. The red tails. No one knows yet that this distinctive paint scheme will become legendary. No one knows that bomber crews will soon be requesting red tail escorts specifically. They only know they finally have the aircraft to match their skills. Colonel Davis calls a formation at Ramitelli. 400 men stand at attention in the Italian sunshine. He tells them, "We have the best fighters in the war. We have the best training. Now we're going to prove we're the best fighter group in the 15th Air Force. Not just among Negro units. Among all units. White or black. Our mission is simple. Protect the bombers. Stay with them no matter what. Anyone who abandons bombers to chase easy kills will answer to me." The men understand. This is more than tactics. This is philosophy. The 332nd will be judged not by how many enemy fighters they shoot down, but by how many bombers they bring home safely. It's a harder metric. More demanding. But if they succeed, it will be undeniable proof of their capability. June 9, 1944. The 332nd flies its first bomber escort mission in P-51 Mustangs. 64 fighters protecting B-17 flying fortresses targeting Munich. The mission is routine. No enemy fighters appear. But bomber crews notice something different about these escorts. They stay close. They don't wander off looking for action. They form a protective shield around the bomber formation and maintain it throughout the mission. When the bombers land back in Italy, crews ask about the fighters with red tails. Who are they? Someone explains. They're the Negro fighter group. The colored boys. The reaction is complex. Some white crew members express surprise that black pilots exist. Others remember the 99th's performance in Sicily. A few don't care about race. They only care about survival. And these red tails look like they know how to keep bombers alive. June 1944. The strategic bombing campaign against Germany reaches maximum intensity. Thousands of heavy bombers, B-17s and B-24s, strike targets across the Reich. Oil refineries, aircraft factories, transportation hubs. Each raid involves hundreds of aircraft, thousands of crew members. The losses are catastrophic. During Big Week in February 1944, before the 332nd began flying escort missions, the 8th Air Force lost 226 bombers in 6 days. That's 2,260 crew members killed, wounded, or captured. Each B-17 flying fortress costs $238,000, equivalent to millions in modern currency. But the human cost is incalculable. These are trained crews, irreplaceable men with hundreds of hours of experience. The survival rate for bomber crews is grim. Complete a tour of duty, 25 missions, and you've beaten the odds. Most crews don't make it that far. Fighter escort becomes the difference between acceptable losses and catastrophic losses. This is the mission the 332nd Fighter Group is training for. July 18, 1944. The mission that will define the Red Tails. Colonel Davis leads 66 P-51 Mustangs to rendezvous with bombers targeting the Luftwaffe base at Memmingen, Germany. Deep in Bavaria. 1,800 miles round trip. The mission is supposed to be routine. Intelligence reports minimal enemy fighter presence. But intelligence is wrong. The bombers are late. Davis makes a crucial decision. Orbit in enemy territory rather than return to base. His fighters circle over German airspace, burning precious fuel, waiting. When the bombers finally appear, so does the Luftwaffe. Approximately 100 German fighters, Bf-109s and Fw-190s, attacking from multiple directions. The Germans have learned that overwhelming numbers might break the protective screen. What follows is the largest air battle the 332nd has faced. Lieutenant Clarence Lester sees 3 Fw-190s diving on AB-17. He breaks left, guns already firing. The first German fighter explodes. The second pulls up sharply but Lester stays with him, firing in short bursts. The Focke-Wulf trails smoke and spins away. The third German realizes he's next and dives for cloud cover. Lester doesn't pursue. He returns to the bombers. Mission first. Lieutenant Jack Holzclaw finds himself in a turning fight with a Bf-109. The German is good, experienced, aggressive. They circle each other at high speed, each trying to get into firing position. Holzclaw remembers his training. Patience. Let the enemy make a mistake. The German pulls too tight, bleeds off airspeed. Holzclaw pounces. A 2-second burst from his 50 calibers. The Messerschmitt's canopy shatters. But despite fierce defense by the 332nd, 15 B-17s fall to enemy fighters in 20 minutes of savage combat. The Red Tails lose 3 pilots. Lieutenants Robert Hutton, Wellington Irving, and Alfred Brown never return. Their deaths hit the unit hard. These were men they trained with, flew with, lived with. Now they're gone. At the mission debriefing, the air is thick with unspoken questions. Did we fail? Colonel Davis addresses the squadron. We arrived at an impossible situation. 100 German fighters already engaging the bombers. We prevented complete disaster. We claimed 11 to 12 victories. Yes, we lost bombers. Yes, we lost pilots. But we did our job. We stayed with the bombers and fought. Some officers in the 15th Air Force see the July 18th mission differently. Colonel Momyer, who's been waiting for the 332nd to fail, notes the high bomber losses in his records. Evidence, he believes, that black pilots can't handle major battles. But bomber crews know better. They saw the Red Tails dive into overwhelming odds. They saw how the Mustangs stayed close even when German fighters swarmed. Word spreads through bomber bases in Italy. If you're going to Germany, request the Red Tails. They don't abandon you. Letters from bomber crews to family members begin mentioning the colored boys who saved their lives. These letters reach newspaper editors in northern cities. Stories appear. The Red Tails are becoming known. Not yet famous. But known. August 1944. The 332nd flies mission after mission. Berlin. Vienna. Ploesti. Munich. Every major target in the Reich. The rhythm of war becomes routine. Wake before dawn. Mission briefing. Pre-flight checks. Takeoff. 6 hours in a cramped cockpit. Combat. Landing. Debriefing. Sleep. Repeat. The losses continue. Not just from enemy action. Aircraft failures. Weather. Accidents. War grinds men down. Lieutenant Robert Wiggins shoots down a German fighter over Austria, then his engine fails. He bails out over enemy territory. Captured. Lieutenant Gwyn Pearson's aircraft is hit by flak over Hungary. He manages to crash land behind Soviet lines. Months will pass before he returns. These are the mathematics of air combat. Skill and courage improve the odds. But the odds are still terrible. Yet something remarkable is happening. The 332 ND's bomber protection record is extraordinary. Statistical analysis will later show that bomber formations under Red Tail escort lose fewer aircraft to fighters than formations protected by other groups. The 332nd isn't shooting down more enemies than other units. They're doing something harder. They're staying with the bombers. Colonel Davis's directive is absolute. Do not abandon your formation to chase victories. Anyone can shoot down a fighter if they leave their post. It takes discipline to stay with the bombers when the enemy is running. This philosophy costs the Red Tails potential ace status. In other units, pilots who shoot down 5 enemy aircraft become aces, celebrated heroes. The 332nd produces fewer aces because their pilots prioritize protection over kills. Lee Archer, who will be credited with 4 confirmed victories, remembers the frustration. I'd see a German fighter running, and every instinct said chase him. But I'd look at the bombers, see the crews watching us, trusting us. And I'd stay. Because that was the mission. September 1944. The Red Tails receive orders for the longest escort mission yet. A strike on the Daimler-Benz tank factory in Berlin. 1,800 miles round trip. 7 hours in the air. Intelligence warns that the target will be heavily defended. Not just conventional fighters, but Germany's secret weapon. The Messerschmitt Me-262 jet. This aircraft can reach 540 miles per hour. No propeller-driven fighter can catch it. The pilots of the 332nd study the Me-262's weaknesses. It's fast but has limited maneuverability at high speed. It needs long, straight approaches to line up attacks. If you can disrupt its approach, force it to turn, you reduce its advantage. March 24, 1945. The mission to Berlin. Colonel Davis leads 43 P-51 Mustangs deep into the heart of Nazi Germany. As they approach Berlin, the jets appear. 6 Me-262s from Jägerschwader 7. The largest jet fighter force ever assembled for a single interception. The sky erupts in chaos. The jets make slashing attacks through the bomber formation, cannon fire tearing through aluminum. Lieutenant Roscoe Brown sees a Me-262 setting up an attack run. He dives, trying to cut it off. The jet is impossibly fast. Brown fires ahead of it, leading the target. Tracers arc through the sky. Hits. The Me-262 trails smoke and dives away. Brown doesn't see it crash, but his gun camera film confirms the hits. First confirmed Me-262 kill by a 332nd pilot. Lieutenant Earl Lane sees another jet climbing away. The Me-262 is faster, but Lane's Mustang is in a power dive. For a few seconds, he has the speed to close the gap. He fires. The jet's left engine explodes. The aircraft rolls over and spins toward the ground. Captain Charles Brantley spots a third Me-262 making a head-on pass at the bombers. He charges straight at it, guns blazing. The German pilot, facing .50 caliber fire, breaks off his attack. Brantley stays with him, forcing the jet into turns where it loses its speed advantage. Finally, at low altitude, Brantley gets a clear shot. The Me-262 disintegrates. 3 jets destroyed. 1 damaged. The Red Tails have just exceeded the total of all previous American Me-262 kills in one afternoon. When they land at Ramitelli, the ground crews swarm the aircraft, counting the victories. The pilots are exhausted, hands shaking from adrenaline. They've faced the most advanced fighter aircraft in the world and won. Not through technological superiority. Through training, discipline, and skill. The 332nd Fighter Group receives a Distinguished Unit Citation for the Berlin mission. It's recognition. Finally, official recognition. But for the men who flew that mission, the real victory is simpler. They went to Berlin, faced the best Germany could field, and brought their bombers home. Spring 1945. Germany is collapsing. Soviet forces push from the east. American and British armies drive from the west. But the Luftwaffe is still fighting. Despite fuel shortages, despite overwhelming Allied air superiority, German pilots continue to resist. The strategic bombing campaign doesn't end until Germany surrenders. Every mission is still dangerous. Every sortie can be fatal. The 332nd continues flying. By now, they've established a reputation. Bomber crews request them specifically. Some bomber groups try to time their missions to coincide with red-tail escort schedules. The distinctive red-tailed Mustangs are more than just aircraft. They're symbols of protection. White bomber crews who once questioned whether black men could fight now trust their lives to red-tail protection. Lieutenant Harold Morris, A.B., 17-tail gunner from Georgia, writes to his wife. "The colored pilots flew with us today. I never thought I'd be glad to see a Negro. But when those red tails showed up, I damn near cried. They brought us home. I don't care what color they are." This sentiment, repeated in letters and diaries across bomber units, represents a quiet revolution. Shared danger creates bonds that civilian prejudice can't break. April 1945. The 332nd flies its last combat missions. Strafing runs against German airfields. Escort missions to targets in Czechoslovakia and Austria. The war in Europe has weeks remaining. For the red tails, every mission counts. Every safe return is another data point proving their capability. Lee Archer shoots down his fourth confirmed victory. He'll spend decades fighting to be recognized as the first black ace, though official records will remain ambiguous. The aerial combat over Europe is nearly finished. But recognition is just beginning. Colonel Davis receives orders to report to Washington. The Pentagon wants his assessment of black combat aviation. For 2 years, Davis has commanded the 332nd. He's flown 60 missions. He's watched men die and watched others become heroes. Now he must reduce all of that experience to official reports and recommendations. In Washington, Davis faces rooms full of generals. Some are genuinely interested in his insights. Others are hoping he'll confirm that the experiment was a mistake. Davis presents the facts. Mission totals. Aircraft destroyed. Bomber protection rates. Decorations earned. The numbers are irrefutable. The 332nd has performed at or above the level of comparable white units. Therefore, segregation in military aviation serves no purpose except the perpetuation of prejudice. The generals thank him for his report. Some seem uncomfortable. The institution doesn't want to admit that decades of official policy were based on racist pseudoscience. But the war has produced evidence too strong to ignore. Meanwhile, in Italy, the men of the 332nd wait for victory. May 8, 1945. Victory in Europe. Germany surrenders. The war ends. At Ramitelli Airfield, 400 men gather for formation. They've flown 1,578 missions. They've shot down 112 enemy aircraft. They've destroyed 150 aircraft on the ground. They've damaged or destroyed nearly 1,000 locomotives, rail cars, and vehicles. More importantly, they've brought their bombers home at rates superior to other fighter groups. The statistics are compiled, documented, irrefutable. But there's no celebration. While white units prepare for victory parades, the 332nd faces questions about their future. Will the Army Air Forces maintain segregated units? Will black pilots be allowed to continue serving? The men who risked their lives for America don't know if America wants them anymore. Colonel Davis addresses his unit. You have proven something that should never have needed proving. That courage, skill, and dedication have no color. The fight isn't over. We face different enemies now. But we've shown how to win. The 332nd begins the long journey home. Back to America. To segregation. To a country where their achievements are celebrated in black newspapers but largely ignored by mainstream press. The German pilots reportedly knew about the Schwarz-Vogel-Männchen. Many white Americans don't know black fighter pilots even existed. This erasure is deliberate. Acknowledging the Tuskegee Airmen's success requires acknowledging the injustice of segregation. If black pilots could fight as well as white pilots, if they could master complex technology and demonstrate extraordinary courage, then every justification for racial discrimination collapses. The institutions that perpetuated segregation aren't ready for that reckoning. So the stories go untold. The achievements go unrecognized. Individual pilots return to civilian life and find that their combat records mean nothing. The transformation wasn't immediate. But bomber crews knew. The men who flew through German flak and fighter opposition, the men who watched friends die, they knew who protected them. Lieutenant James Wilson, AB-17 pilot from Nebraska, testified before a congressional committee in 1946. "I don't care what anyone says about Negroes. The colored pilots saved my crew's lives 3 times. They're the finest fighter pilots I ever flew with." This testimony, from a white officer from a segregated state, represents something profound. Shared combat creates a form of integration that civilian society can't achieve. In the air, over Germany, race becomes irrelevant. Only skill and courage matter. The bomber crew's advocacy becomes crucial evidence in the integration debate. These aren't civil rights activists or progressive politicians. These are military men, many from segregated states, who saw the truth firsthand. General Benjamin Davis, promoted after the war, uses their testimony strategically. When politicians argue that integration will harm military effectiveness, Davis presents bomber crew statements. When military officers claim black soldiers can't handle technical roles, Davis shows the 332 ND's aircraft maintenance records. The evidence is overwhelming. Integration isn't a social experiment. It's a military necessity. July 26, 1948. President Harry Truman signs Executive Order 9981. It mandates the integration of the United States Armed Forces. The order states that there shall be equality of treatment and opportunity for all persons in the armed services without regard to race, color, religion, or national origin. The Tuskegee Airmen's combat record is explicitly cited as evidence that segregation serves no military purpose. Colonel Davis becomes the Air Force's first black general in 1954. Its recognition, finally. But it comes years after his service, years after he proved his capability beyond any reasonable doubt. The institutional machinery moves slowly, grudgingly. Other Tuskegee Airmen struggle with civilian life. Lee Archer, with his 4 confirmed victories, works as an executive but rarely mentions his war record. "Nobody believed me anyway," he says. A black fighter pilot? Must be lying. The systemic erasure of their achievements continues for decades. History books don't mention them. War documentaries ignore them. Veterans organizations in southern states refuse to accept black members. The men who fought for America are denied the right to march in some Memorial Day parades. They're told to use separate entrances at some VFW halls. The irony is brutal. They could fly over Berlin and fight German jets, but they can't drink at certain water fountains back home. 1950s and 1960s. The Tuskegee Airmen remain largely unknown to mainstream America. Their story is taught in black schools and churches. Black newspapers write about them. But broader American culture ignores their achievements. Some pilots speak at schools. Others keep silent, unwilling to relive combat or face disbelief. The psychological toll of this erasure is profound. These men proved themselves under impossible circumstances. Yet decades later, they still face prejudice. Charles Debo, who shot down 3 German fighters in one mission, applies for a job at a major airline in 1957. He has thousands of hours of flight time, combat experience, and exemplary military record. The airline rejects his application without interview. The reason, though unspoken, is clear. 1970s, the civil rights movement brings renewed attention to black World War II veterans. Historians begin researching the Tuskegee Airmen. Books are published. Television documentaries are produced. Slowly, their story emerges from obscurity. But many pilots don't live to see this recognition. Of the 996 pilots who trained at Tuskegee, hundreds die without national acknowledgement of their service. They remain unknown heroes, celebrated only within their own communities. 1995, the Air Force conducts a comprehensive review of World War II aerial victories. The goal is to determine if Lee Archer and several other Tuskegee pilots deserve belated recognition as aces. The review is exhaustive, examining gun camera footage, mission reports, witness statements. The evidence is frustratingly incomplete. War records were poorly maintained for black units. Gun camera film was often lost or destroyed. The review concludes that several Tuskegee pilots may have achieved A status, but definitive proof doesn't exist. It's a final insult. The institution that denied them opportunities, that segregated them, that failed to properly document their achievements, now claims insufficient evidence to recognize them. March 29, 2007. The United States Capitol. President George W. Bush awards the Congressional Gold Medal to the Tuskegee Airmen. It's the nation's highest civilian honor. 300 surviving pilots attend the ceremony. Most are in their 80s. They've waited over 60 years for national recognition. Bush speaks. You shattered stereotypes. You opened doors. You changed history. The applause is thunderous. But the moment is bittersweet. So many didn't live to see this day. The 700 pilots who died before 2007 never received this honor. They died as unsung heroes, their achievements known only to their families and communities. Roscoe Brown, who shot down the Me-262 over Berlin, speaks briefly. We fought 3 wars. Against Germany. Against racism in our own military. Against history's forgetfulness. We won all 3, but at tremendous cost. The surviving Tuskegee Airmen become sought-after speakers. Schools invite them. Documentary makers interview them. Their story is finally being told, finally being acknowledged. The final accounting is irrefutable. The 332nd Fighter Group flew 1,578 missions, 15,000 sorties. They shot down 112 enemy aircraft. They destroyed 150 planes on the ground. They damaged or destroyed nearly 1,000 ground vehicles and locomotives. They earned 96 Distinguished Flying Crosses, 744 Air Medals, 14 Bronze Stars, and 8 Purple Hearts. 3 pilots earned the Distinguished Unit Citation. The group itself received the Distinguished Unit Citation. But numbers don't tell the whole story. The real achievement is what they proved. They demonstrated that racial prejudice was a lie. They showed that given equal training and opportunity, Black Americans could excel at the most demanding military tasks. They forced America to confront the contradictions of fighting fascism abroad while maintaining segregation at home. The bomber crews knew the truth first. White airmen from segregated states learned in the skies over Germany that their lives depended on the skill and courage of black pilots. When those bomber crews returned home and spoke about the red tails, they became advocates for integration. Not because of ideology, but because of lived experience. The institutional barriers fell slowly. President Truman's 1948 integration order faced massive resistance. But the evidence from combat was too strong to ignore. By the Korean War, American military units fought integrated. Black and white soldiers served together. The change wasn't complete, and prejudice didn't vanish. But the foundation of segregation was cracked. The Tuskegee Airmen became symbols of excellence against impossible odds. Their story inspired generations. Young Black Americans saw proof that barriers could be overcome. Every Black pilot, every Black astronaut, every Black military officer stands on the foundation they built. The reportedly nicknamed Schwarz-Vogelmännchen, the Black Birdman, transformed mockery into respect. Every German fighter destroyed, every bomber protected, every mission completed added evidence to an irrefutable case. The color of a pilot's skin had nothing to do with his ability to fly and fight. Colonel Benjamin Davis, reflecting late in life, said it best. We weren't just fighting for victory over Germany. We were fighting for the right to fight. We were proving that excellence has no color. That courage is universal. That given the same opportunity, we could achieve the same results. The sky above Europe in 1944 and 1945 became a crucible where prejudice was tested and found wanting. When Black pilots and white pilots flew the same aircraft, faced the same enemies, and achieved the same victories, the entire structure of racial ideology collapsed. The Tuskegee Airmen didn't just win battles. They won 3 wars. They defeated the Luftwaffe in combat. They challenged Nazi racial ideology through performance. And they helped demolish American segregation through undeniable excellence. Their legacy isn't just military history. It's the story of how determination, skill, and courage can overcome institutional injustice. How a group of men, given only the slightest opportunity, seized it and changed the world. The red tails that marked their aircraft became symbols of protection for bomber crews. But they became something more. They became proof that America's promise of equality wasn't just rhetoric. That when given the chance, Black Americans could excel in any field, overcome any obstacle, achieve any goal. They were mocked. They were doubted. They were systematically excluded and institutionally discriminated against. But when finally given the chance to prove themselves, they owned the skies. And in doing so, they changed not just military aviation, but America itself.